welcome to episode 17 of The Smallest Thing. I'm Lisa Manterfield. This week I have my very first guest on the show. Mary Jo Hazard joins me to talk about her new novel, Stillwater, and we talk about mental health and the effects of lockdown on our well-being. A word of warning. Our conversation does include a discussion about suicide that some listeners might find upsetting. But first, Em and her dad get to grips with their new quarantine protocol. That's hand washing, social distancing, and of course, wearing masks. Plus, Dad has a secret weapon hidden in the cellar. Find out what it is in this week's episode of The Smallest Thing. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Smallest Thing, written by Lisa Manterfield, read for you by Charlie Sanderson.
Chapter 17, Tuesday, August the 9th. If I'm going to be really honest with myself, Dad wouldn't be my first choice of person to get trapped with in a crisis. If I had my pick, I might choose someone a bit more practical, like Deb. But Deb has been incommunicado all day, and what I have in terms of real and available is Dad. So it's with Dad that I make a plan for survival. Or, more accurately, I make a plan and Dad sort of listens. I show Dad the right way to wash up, and we practice holding our hands under hot running water, soaping up and doing an elaborate set of moves to make sure every nook and cranny is clean. All the while singing 2 rounds of Happy Birthday, as suggested online. It's a bit like the hand jive, Dad says, as he rubs the splayed fingers of one hand over the other, twisting them around to repeat on both sides. Per my instructions, he curls his fingers under the others, rubs his palms in circles and massages between his thumbs. The what? I ask. Dad grins and starts to dance, waving one hand over the other and tapping his fists together. He throws a hand up, spraying the kitchen counter and walls with potentially virus-inundated soap suds. "Dad!" I yell, fighting to keep from laughing. "Sorry," he says. But I hear him humming some ancient rock and roll tune as he goes through the rinsing procedure. I bump my hip against his and he pretends to lose his balance. We both understand that now should not be a time for levity, but these few moments of laughter with my dad do me more good than any medicine. Dad and I come to an agreement that imposing a further quarantine on ourselves and sealing ourselves in the house, an option that we actually consider, would end in a one-way ticket to insanity. Even the short periods of time I've spent indoors have left me agitated and grumpy. So I can't imagine what would happen if Dad and I locked ourselves away together. Instead, we agree to limit our excursions and devise a strategy to reduce our risk of exposure. Despite the warm weather, we will always dress in long trousers and long-sleeved shirts, and we'll keep our heads covered with the woolen caps Grandma knitted us one Christmas. We practice taping the wrists of our latex gloves to the ends of our sleeves and make sure our masks are firmly in place. I make Dad promise to stay the prescribed distance from everyone, no matter what. He agrees, albeit reluctantly. I set up a bath of bleach solution by the back door that we'll step through before we come in, and I place bowls of Deb's magic vinegar water by the door and at other spots around the house. At this, Dad nods his approval. When we stop for a tea break, I ask Dad something that's been bothering me for a while. Why do you think some people are getting this and others aren't, even if they've obviously been exposed? Dad shrugs. Luck? Deb would say there's no such thing as luck. She'd probably propose a scientific investigation to examine which factors make people immune. She'd want to know how Dr. Spencer's wife, Louise, is still healthy, despite not even knowing her husband had a deadly virus, let alone taking precautions to prevent catching it. And Mrs. Glover. She's old and has so many ailments she could spend an entire afternoon listening to her list them. She's always got her nose in everyone else's business, so I have no doubt that she's been in contact with every sick person. And yet she's as fit as a fiddle. What Deb would want to know, and what I want to know, is why. But I can't exactly march up to her front door and say, "Oh, hello, Mrs. G, how come you're not dead yet?" All we can do is try our best to keep ourselves healthy, I tell Dad. There's always your mother's exercise DVDs. I give him a look that says, "Really, Dad?" And we settle on doing 5 sets of stairs. I found lots of information about how to build immunity, I tell Dad as we march up and down the stairs. I tell him about everything I've discovered, from eating sauerkraut to popping vitamin C. As we have neither in the house, it doesn't help us at all. I really miss your homegrown veggies. Dad stops and seems to consider me for a moment. He sniffs as if sucking in resolve for a decision he's made. "There's something I want to show you," he says. "It's our secret weapon." For a minute, I wonder if Dad has been building nuclear warheads out in the shed, but that's not what he means. I follow him out to the hall, where he flicks on the light to the cellar. "Are we going to tunnel out of here?" I ask. He laughs. "I've always fancied myself as a bit of a Steve McQueen, but given we're built on bedrock, I don't think I have the stamina to dig my way out with a couple of teaspoons. Come on." He heads down the narrow stone steps. I half expect him to have built us a bunker, like the old Anderson shelters they had during the war, complete with army-issue camp beds, gas masks and piles of sandbags. Air raid sirens whirring above ground every time someone with the virus approaches the house. But, of course, that's not what Dad has up his sleeve. He stops at a wooden box against one cellar wall. It's the kind Andy used to have in his shop, filled with cauliflowers or apples. He pulls back a piece of sacking that lies across the top to show me what's inside. "It's a box of sand," I say. He grins like he's about to show me the best ever magic trick and brushes away the top layer of sand. Underneath, a long brown cylinder emerges. But as Dad brushes away more sand, I see it's not brown, it's orange. And it's not a cylinder either. "Carrots," I say. "Proper ones, all the vitamins you could ask for." "What are they doing down here?" "They're from my garden. I'm storing them." I look around and see other likely-looking containers. There are sacks of potatoes and boxes of turnips against the walls, bunches of onions and garlic hanging from a rack, and on a set of makeshift shelves sit jars of beetroot, tomato sauce and jam, and bags of dried beans. With a flourish, Dad presents his final surprise. Inside an old chest freezer are bags of frozen green beans, squash, cauliflower and Brussels sprouts. "Weren't you supposed to turn these in?" I ask. "Well, yes," he says, averting his eyes. "But now that we know they won't make us ill, I thought a bit of roughage might do us some good." "But why didn't you tell me sooner? We could have been eating these instead of that powdered slop." Dad looks chagrined. "I broke the rules. I was afraid I'd get caught." I suppress a small giggle. Good to know I'm not the only one with a rebellious streak. "I could learn a lot from you." He grins at me like I'm 6 again, sharing a moment of mischief with Dad before I grew up and he got so serious. "Can I tempt you with a bit of proper shepherd's pie, or perhaps some minestrone soup?" I'm stunned, both by his deceit and his excitement. We've been condemned to an unknown fate, and Dad's big act of rebellion is contraband vegetables. But it's still an act of rebellion. I glance at my dad in the dim light of the cellar and see a small ray of hope. The faint glimmer of an idea has started to sparkle inside me. Could Dad's vegetable stash be the key that opens the door to Mrs. Glover's secret? For that alone, Dad is king today. I get dressed, per our agreed protocol, and leave Dad happily chopping vegetables for our shepherd's pie. There aren't many people out in the streets anymore. Why would there be? There's nowhere to go and nothing to do. I pass a couple of neighbours walking toward the cricket pitch and give them a small nod in greeting. I'm still aware that I am the subject of recent village gossip, Rose quarantine, and I'm not in the mood to stand and explain myself. Nor do I wish to see those awkward tight looks people get when they're trying not to be judgmental, but judge you anyway. Besides, I'm on a mission. Mrs. Glover's doorbell poses the first complication in my plan. Thanks to my research, I now see every surface as a potential colony of virus cells, just waiting to find a new host in which to set up camp. This new paranoia can't be good for a person, but I can't stop myself imagining some infected person's virus lingering on Mrs. G's doorbell, just waiting to hitch a ride on the end of my finger to every other thing I touch. You don't realise how many surfaces you touch on a daily basis, and how many times you unconsciously scratch an itch or rub your eye until you're faced with every contact having the potential to kill you. I find a stick under one of Mrs. Glover's rose bushes and poke it at the doorbell. I hear chimes on the other side of the door and wait. Out of the corner of my eye, a movement catches my attention, a slight twitch of the curtain. I'm not quick enough to see who it is, but I've no doubt it's Mrs. Glover. I poke the doorbell again, twice this time, to let her know I know she's in there. Come on out, you nosy old bat, I think. Then remind myself to be nice. Although I have come bearing gifts for her, ultimately, it's she who has what I need. It's a few more seconds before a stooped shape ambles up to the frosted glass door. I hear a jangling noise, and the door creaks open, the security chain hanging in a low arc, and one lens of Mrs. Glover's metal-rimmed glasses pressed into the gap. "What is it?" she asks, her voice wary. I sense an undertone of curiosity, and I hope it will find its way to the surface. "Hi, Mrs. Glover." I turn on the smile Mum always begs me to save for the school photographer. "It's me, Emma. How are you?" "What do you want?" She sounds justifiably suspicious. "My dad sent me over to make sure you're okay, and he asked me to bring you these." I'll hold out the basket in my hand and show her the contents. A clear plastic bag containing 6 carrots. They are like gold, homegrown and packed with nutrients. More important, thanks to the earlier food panic, they're as rare as hen's teeth, as my grandma would say. Mrs. Glover eyes them. The door creaks open a hair more, but she makes no move to take the offering. "Are you keeping well?" I ask. "Who wants to know?" "My dad." I struggle to keep a friendly tone in my voice in the presence of such a cantankerous old biddy. I can't understand why Dad would care more than half a whisker about people if this is how they're going to treat him. "He just wants to make sure you're all right." Behind her glasses, Mrs. Glover's eyes narrow. I can't believe she'd be suspicious of my dad checking up on her. Dad, for all his faults, doesn't have a malicious bone in his body. But I can't blame her. It's no longer clear who to trust and who might turn on you in an instant. "I'm fine," she says finally. "No thanks to our government." I wait patiently as she rattles on about her rights and about the old days when you knew the country had the best interests of its people at heart. I make sympathetic noises as she explains what it was like during the war and how neighbours looked after one another and there wasn't this feeling of mistrust. "Now we have no one to count on but ourselves. If I get out of this alive, it will be my own doing." I press the basket forward, tilting it to show her the carrots. At last, it's too much for her to resist, and she pokes a liver-spotted hand through the door and curls it around the bag. She isn't even wearing gloves. "What's your secret, Mrs. Glover?" I ask. She yanks the carrots into the house and squints at me. "I don't have a secret. What do you mean, secret?" "What are you doing to stay so healthy?" I want to come straight out and ask, "How come you haven't caught this yet?" But that would be rude, and Mrs. Glover won't stand for that. But it doesn't stop me wanting to ask. "Good genes," she says, "and a resilience your generation couldn't hope to understand." And with that, she closes the door, with me on one side and our carrots on the other. I swing a foot back, ready to kick a stubborn old front door, but I catch myself just in time. It's just the kind of thing that would prompt a phone call to my dad, and I don't need that right now. Instead, I settle for slamming her gate behind me, relishing the clanging echo that rings long after I'm gone. My dad has got this whole thing wrong. There is no community here anymore. It's every man for himself, and every miserable old woman for herself. After all he's done for the village, the old bat treats me like this. I don't know how she has the nerve. I need to talk to Deb. I need a bitch fest. A sympathetic ear to listen to me vent and do nothing more than nod in agreement, like any good friend would. But Deb's still subject to her dad's quarantine, and she hasn't answered any of my texts all day. I turn and head in the direction of her street. Maybe if I walk by, she'll see me. Maybe we can talk through the window. Or maybe she'll at least send a message somehow. The house looks quiet, but not empty. I stand under Deb's window and hurl pebble after pebble until finally her curtain twitches. Deb's face pops into view for a second, then vanishes again. I'm not leaving until I talk to her. I fire off a series of well-aimed stones, one after another, until Deb comes back to the window. She holds up a piece of white paper. On it, she's written, "Phone's dead." For a second, I'm just relieved to know why she hasn't been in touch. I seriously thought she was ignoring me. Then it dawns on me what a lame excuse that is. A motion that she should perhaps consider plugging it in, but she doesn't respond. "Are you okay?" I mouth. She gives me a look that, even from this distance, burns with sarcasm. "What do you think?" it says. "I need to talk to you. Open the window." Deb shakes her head. She glances behind her as if someone is there. I duck behind Helena's hydrangea. I don't know what's going on in their house, but for some reason Deb doesn't want to or can't talk to me. I peer out, and Deb holds up her hand for me to wait for a minute, then disappears, returning a moment later and beckoning me toward the house. Her window pops open a crack, and a folded piece of paper drops to the ground by my feet. At Deb's urging, I scoop it up and run for the cover of the hydrangea again. Unfolding the sheet, I see Deb's familiar handwriting, tiny rounded letters crushed into neat rows of purple ink. Dad's banned phones and internet. Worried we're being watched? Totally lost his mind. Helena's sick. I'm fine. Miss you like mad. Destroy this note. It's signed with a very un-Deb-like purple heart. When I look back at her, Deb has hung a single black sock from the window latch. She grins at me. I force my mouth into a smile, but my heart cramps. When we were young, before we had our own phones, the window sock was our secret signal. It meant that we were at home, bored, and looking for company. During the summer holidays, we'd hang our socks as soon as we were up, and whichever of us was out first would know it was okay to call on the other. It was stupid, really, because we could have just phoned or knocked on the door, but the window sock gave us a secret that no one else understood, and that made the bond between us all the more special. Now, all Deb and I can do is stare at one another. I can't knock on her door. I can't ask her to come out with me. Deb is at home, scared more than bored, and looking for my company. But there is nothing I can do about it. Her black sock is now our secret signal that everything has changed for us. Overnight, my friend and I have grown old together, but not in the way we'd once planned.
Welcome back. Before I introduce you to my guest, here's a quick reminder that you still have time to enter the book birthday giveaway from last week. All you have to do is go to my website, lisamantefield.com, and leave a comment on the M's Book Birthday blog post from last week. 3 winners will be drawn at random on August the 1st and will win a copy of either The Smallest Thing or my first novel, A Strange Companion, in their choice of format. The link is in the show notes below. But now, I'd like to introduce you to my special guest, author Mary Jo Hazard. Mary Jo Hazard is a licensed psychotherapist and author of 3 children's books. Her new novel is Stillwater, and it's a bittersweet coming-of-age story that cracks open the issues of divorce, suicide, and mental health in a time when they were taboo topics. Mary Jo lives on the Palos Verdes Peninsula in Southern California. Her mission is to remove the stigma of mental health and help others live their lives to the fullest. Mary Jo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, first, congratulations on the recent publication of Stillwater, which is your debut YA novel.
Yeah, thank you. I'm still pinching myself.
Yeah, I bet. So the book tells the story of 3 young friends living in a small town in upstate New York in the 1950s. And on the surface, it seems like an idyllic place and an innocent time to be a teen. But Grace, who's the main character, soon discovers that danger lurks beneath the surface. So can you tell us a bit about the inspiration for the book?
And I grew up in Stillwater, and the book has a mystery in it. There's an arsonist. The book takes place one summer in Stillwater, and the girls are 12 years old, and that summer, a series of fires breaks out in Stillwater. And one of the girls, Luann, her schizophrenic uncle, is blamed because he's always out at night riding his bicycle, and when the fire department goes to a fire, he's there. He's the first one there. He's waiting for the fire department. And so because he's schizophrenic and different, and because he's the first one at the fires, he's the one who is accused, who everyone in the town thinks did it. He's the town boogeyman, so everyone fears him. And Grace and Luann think that he's innocent. And so Grace convinces Maggie to help her and Luann find out who is the real arsonist. So basically, that is the mystery behind the story.
Yeah, so I've read the book several times. I read it while you were writing it. I had that good fortune. And then since then, so I do know a little bit about the story. But it's more than just a mystery. I mean, it really delves into the topic of mental health and how attitudes have changed. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about how, attitudes towards mental health have changed since the book was set in the 1950s, to what we're dealing with today? Have they changed, or how have they not changed?
That's debatable. Back in the 50s, when mental health was looked at completely differently, there was a huge stigma if you were mentally ill. And I think there still is a stigma today. But, back then you were considered, there wasn't much treatment. You were considered a lunatic. You were told to snap out of it, or you were given medication. And I think the basic medication that they gave people was Thorazine, which was prescribed for just about every mental illness back then. And if you were bipolar or schizophrenic, you were treated with Thorazine. You were also sent to a mental institution. And if you were schizophrenic, you were treated with cold showers and confined. And if you were bipolar, you were treated with shock treatments. Now it's completely different. They still use electronic shock treatments for bipolar disorder, but it's much more refined, much more gentle. There aren't as many bad effects. And if you're schizophrenic, there are a lot of different medications. But unfortunately, people who are schizophrenic don't like to take medication. So they take it for a while, and then usually they go off their medication. But there are a lot more treatments now if people take advantage of them. But there still is a stigma about mental illness.
Yeah. And just the fact that you use the term the town boogeyman, I think says a lot about that time. But I think hopefully there are more resources available for people now who are struggling with mental illness, and more acceptance, I would hope.
I think there is. One of the characters in the book, Grace's father, has committed suicide, and she isn't aware of it. In the beginning of the book, at the beginning of the summer, she was told when she was 8 years old and he died in an accident. And so, but she's always thought that there was something suspicious about it because she could never get her mother or her grandfather to discuss the details. And so that summer, she finds out that he had committed suicide when she was 8, and she's devastated. And now, when there's a lot more suicide prevention programs, there's more suicide awareness. There are programs for survivors of suicide, meaning survivors of suicide used to mean the family members and friends, but now it's also used for people who attempted suicide and have survived. So there's a lot more help. There's helplines and all different kinds of resources, but suicide is still a huge problem in the United States. In fact, it's the second leading cause of death with children between 10 and 14.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it's the ninth leading cause of death between 18-year-olds and people who are 34.
And I know you've written articles and essays and on your blog about your own experience with suicide. And so do you think that played into your inspiration to write the book?
Actually, when I started the book, no, I had no intention of writing about suicide. And it just so happened it was one of those things that you're an author, you know, that as you write, sometimes the characters take on a life of their own and you follow them. And I realized that Grace was struggling with something. And then I realized, of course, you know, her father didn't die in an accident. He committed suicide. And in my case, my father committed suicide when I was 30. So I was always aware of it. I wasn't like Grace, but it was a horrific, you know, experience to contend with.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, and it is amazing how you set off to write about one thing and bit by bit, your own personal experiences kind of find
Yeah.
your way and find their way into your writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, although, like I said, I didn't intend that to happen, writing the book was really very helpful for me because as I wrote from a different viewpoint, I think I was still channeling my father, but in my experience with my father. And I was able to see, although I thought I knew that he didn't leave us unintentionally. He left us because he was mentally ill and in a lot of pain and just couldn't live for one more day. And the same thing that Grace finally recognizes, comes to terms with at the end of that summer, that if her father had been healthy and not suffering from mental illness, he never would have left the family like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we find ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic. And, we were all very focused on our physical health. That's certainly been our primary concern. But I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of mental health from the effects of this lockdown and our isolation.
You know, that's an interesting question. And according to the news, there are a lot more, obviously, there are a lot of depressed people. They expect there to be a lot of suicides. It's definitely a new normal. And then when we get out of this situation, there's still going to be a lot of issues. You know, there's going to be unemployment, different businesses are going to fail. Look at restaurants. That's going to be an entirely new experience for the restaurant owners and the patrons. And I think that just the realities of the pandemic are going to cause a lot of people to be depressed and hopefully not commit suicide. Hopefully they'll find other ways and avenues to deal with it. But it's definitely a concern.
Yeah. And I know you were a member of the Red Cross team, the Red Cross mental health crisis team after 9/11, and you've also worked with flood and fire victims. So you've worked with people who are dealing with PTSD. So I'm wondering what kind of things, we should be on the lookout for, what kind of ways that would manifest itself.
Post-traumatic stress disorder? Well, actually, post-traumatic stress is your reaction to a situation that's completely out of the norm, which we could all say this pandemic is, right? None of us have ever experienced something like this before. So I think, as you get out of it, the typical symptoms with PTSD are, flashbacks, kind of rumination, You either eat too much or too little, you have problems sleeping, you either want to sleep all the time or you can't sleep at all. Symptoms like that. And I think a lot of people are dealing with those things right now.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I'm hearing that from a lot of people. So if there are people out there listening who are experiencing loneliness or depression or this sort of feeling of hopelessness as this lockdown situation drags on, what advice do you have for them?
Well, I think they should talk about it. I think definitely they should talk about their feelings, to their friends, to their family, if they can. Zoom calls like this, even though you're not in person, it's still nice seeing someone else. Reconnecting with you after all this time really makes me feel good. Hearing your voice and everything, and people can connect on FaceTime. They can talk on the telephone, and if they're really depressed, they can find a doctor, a therapist, or a psychiatrist and do telehealth calls. And those things actually work. In fact, they've been proven, I think, to be very effective with children. So that's what I would suggest. I'd also suggest, if you can, get out of the house, go for a walk every day. Of course, you wear a mask, you socially distance, but just to get out of the house and be in nature. If you're in the city, you just need to walk around the block a few times and just do something to up your energy and elevate your mood. Those things help. And
Yeah.
try to eat a healthy diet. It doesn't, I know, we like comfort food at this time, but my comfort food would be a Diet Coke, a tuna fish sandwich, and a bag of potato chips. And so I try to avoid things like that. I don't buy potato chips because they really tempt me. Those are the things, and actually try to put some structure into your life too. I think it helps if every morning when you get up, you say, okay, after I eat breakfast, I'm going for a walk, and head out the door for 45 minutes,
Yeah.
And just have a regular routine. That does help.
Yeah, I think so too. I did not do that for the first month or so of the pandemic, and I really started to feel the effects of that. So that's something that I myself have made a real effort to do, even on the days that I don't feel like it.
And another thing that I think is a good thing, and a friend of mine and yours, Brian Joyner, when we were in a different group, started gratitude, talked us into writing down 3 things a day that we were grateful for. And I do that to this day. That was 2 years ago, maybe. And I still write down 3 things every day that I'm grateful for. It's a great way to start your day. Even if you can't think of anything you're grateful for, you probably are grateful for that hot cup of coffee that you stumbled out of bed to get. And, I'm sure you can find a couple of other things, but it doesn't have to be something humongous that you're grateful for. It can just be the little everyday things.
Yeah, that definitely gives perspective. Yeah. So I know that you have a big, close family and an active social life and are often all over the place traveling. So 2 questions. What's the one thing you're missing most during this time? And where is the first place that you'll travel once it's safe to do so?
Let's see. What is the one thing that I'm missing? The one thing I miss the most is family gatherings. I have 4 great grandchildren. The youngest one is 3.5, and then a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And I just saw 3 of them on Sunday. My granddaughter had a drive-by birthday party for her 3, grandchildren, and I saw them. And it's the first time I've seen them since February. And the other little guy, I haven't seen since February either. When we went on the drive-by, I got out to put the presents on the porch, and the youngest one, 5-year-old Justin, comes running out the porch, and he's going to run right towards me, and his mother screams, "Justin!" He stops in his tracks, and, that breaks your heart, and he looks down, he's completely dejected, and it's just our new normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Different life.
And where would I travel? I would travel back to Saratoga, New York, where I'm from. I would love to see my sister and, my family. My husband's family is back there. His mother is 98 years old, and she's in assisted living. And so that would be the first place I would travel to, we'd go to.
Yeah, I mean, I had a bucket list of places to go at the beginning of the year. And for myself, the first place I'm going to go when I can is I'm going to go see my mom. So,
Right.
yeah, I get that. Mary Jo, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I'm going to flash your book one more time. Mary Jo's book is Stillwater. And where can people buy this beautiful book?
They can buy it on Mascot Books, who were the publisher, mascotbooks.com. They can buy it on Amazon in paperback or Kindle. They can buy it at Barnes & Noble. They can also buy it on the Target website. So there you go.
Fantastic. And where can people find out more about you on your website?
My website is maryjohazard.com, and I write a every other weekly blog. I also write a bi-weekly column in the Palos Verdes Peninsula News, so they can find me any one of those places.
Fantastic. Mary Jo, thank you so much for coming and talking to me today.
Oh.
It's been fantastic.
Thank you for asking me, Lisa. It's been a pleasure.
All right, and good luck with the book.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Mary Jo for taking the time to talk to me today. If you or someone you know is considering suicide or struggling with mental health, please reach out to a suicide prevention or mental health support organization where you live. In the US, you can contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-723-TALK, TALK, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness at 1-800-950-6264. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Smallest Thing. To make sure you don't miss next week's episode, you can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a review and share this series with others you think might enjoy it. If you're on Instagram, tag me there at LisaManterfield_, or follow me on Facebook at author Lisa Manterfield and Twitter at Lisa Manterfield. My newsletter subscribers are always the first to know about my news, events, upcoming releases, giveaways, and more. Sign up for monthly delivery at lisamanterfield.com/subscribe and get your complimentary copy of Love, Loss and Letting Go, 3 of my short stories. Thanks to Justin Joseph for producing and editing this show, and to Ketsa.uk for the music. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening.